Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books, and I've been covering Warner Bros. Discovery and DC and Velma and everything related to Warner Bros. Discovery quite a bit these last few months. I've done more than 100 videos on Warner Bros. Discovery with all the latest developments on the business side, on the creative side. Well, it's pretty interesting because yesterday they announced the slate for the first new bunch of DCU projects. There are 10 projects. It looks like they're going to be kind of interesting, a little bit strange. Of course, you got James Gunn, so you got to have strange. Creature Commandos. Why are they starting with Creature Commandos? Well, it's part of their plan, and actually Creature Commandos was already in production, but it's going to be part of their overall continuity. But this was interesting because they actually did a press event to talk about what they were doing for DCU. James Gunn and Peter Safran, they made a lot of statements. They also did some one-on-one interviews and dealt with some topics more in a detailed way. I found it interesting that James Gunn basically said that DC was effed up. That is not something that people normally say. It's not really something that the CEO of a company uses, that kind of language, but he did say it in the interview, and he did explain why he felt that way, and we'll go into that in a little more depth. Also, we had an interesting interview with Peter Safran, and it's great to get him talking. He is the creator of the Conjuring universe as a producer. That is a horror universe that's the most successful horror universe franchise ever. The movies make hundreds of millions of dollars. They only cost anywhere from $6 to maybe $30 million to make. They make a ton of money. They do have continuity. And he said basically that Batgirl was awful and it was completely unreleasable and shouldn't be released. And he complimented David Zaslav for having the guts to basically say, no, this movie is not going to come out because it's too damn terrible, which of course upset a lot of people who wanted to see Batgirl come out because Batgirl was going to essentially change the entire feel and complexion of the DCU. Not something David Zaslav was going to allow to have happen. So let's get into the first article. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications and give me a thumbs up. James Gunn, new DC slate. Your burning questions are answered. So this is the interview with IO9, speaking with DC Studios heads James Gunn and Peter Safran about everything regarding the DC universe. So first they asked James Gunn, why did you want to do this, be CEO of DC Studios? James Gunn said, I wanted to take care of these characters, and we all know it's been an effed up road for many of them for the past few years. And things haven't been together. And I really thought it's a challenge. But I think it's a possibility to create something really wonderful with these characters. I can't go into politics. I can't do anything with science. So the only thing I can do for this planet is to create stories about love. And that's what I think that we can do over the next 8 to 10 years. So what exactly is DC Studios? Peter Safran says, DC Studios is just a standalone studio production entity, and it's unprecedented because it's the first time ever that all film, all television, live action, animation, and gaming is all centralized under one creative vision. So that was a big deal for Warner Bros. CEO David Zaslav, was the idea of creating a standalone entity where there could be a unified creative vision and, everything centralized under James and myself. That was Zaslav's plan, to create something that would be this unified, single creative vision that everything would fit with. And then as you see, they're looking for every possible opportunity to have continuity between animation, TV, film, games, by having the same actors, for example, who would appear in a TV show, also appear in a movie like they did with John Cena and Peacemaker, but also in animation for animation voices and also in game voices and game performances. What were your thoughts on DC movies before you came on board? The history has been shit. It's been a real effed up journey for DC. I think that there was basically no one minding the mint, and they were giving out IP to creatives that, smiled at whoever was in charge. There was never really any power given to the people in charge. He means the studio executives, to control talent. And so somebody could always go over their head and do whatever they wanted. And we had at the DCEU, which then became the Joss Whedon Justice League, but it also became the Snyderverse, which became this. And we have Wonder Woman, and we have Wonder Woman 1984, which doesn't even match what happened in Wonder Woman 1. And then we have the Arrowverse, and even us coming in with Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, and then all of a sudden, Batmite is a real guy. DC has 4 films scheduled for release in 2023. How do those fit in? I think that we've gotten lucky with the next 4 movies, frankly, because we have Shazam, which leads into Flash, which resets everything, which then goes into Blue Beetle, which is totally disconnected. He can totally be part of the DCU, and that goes into Aquaman, which leads into Superman, our first big project. When does the DCU canon start? And will actors come back? Gunn says, the one thing that we can promise is that everything from our first project, Creature Commandos, forward will be canon and will be connected. We're using some actors from the past. We're not using other actors from the past, but everything from that moment forward will be connected and consistent. Is this a multiverse? Safran says, the DCU is a multiverse, but we're going to be focusing on one universe from that multiverse. And if something isn't DCU, we're going to make that very clear. How will it be clear what's DCU and what isn't? So strictly adult fare like Todd Phillips' Joker or kids animation like Teen Titans Go, we're going to make it very clear that those are DC Elseworlds, just the same way you can do it in the comics. And that's their interview. I like their explanation of the history of DCU. There were a lot of problems, and this is what tells you, like, if you don't sit down and come up with a strategic plan for several years, and it's interesting because I've had talks with other editorial friends who've made comics and been involved in comic universes. I had a comic book universe. We did 50 issues over the course of about a year and a half. You do need a 10-year plan. You may not be able to do your 10-year plan. You may have to make changes, but 10 years is a good stopping point to plan out interconnected stories, whether it's films, comics, whatever it is, and then probably have to reboot after 10 years because actors get older, talent gets older, character arcs go through a certain number of cycles. You know, ultimately you do the most memorable versions of stories of whether it's Spider-Man or Daredevil or whatever the characters are, Wolverine, these are characters that change over time. And if your character doesn't learn and evolve and change over time after overcoming obstacles, then you're not going to actually have really compelling characters. Okay, so let's also take a look at this article. DC Studios co-CEO basically comes right out and admits Batgirl was awful. So here's exactly what Peter Safran said. DC Studios co-head Peter Safran said as much during a recent press event held on the Warner Brothers lot, according to reports. Safran said the studio made the right decision because the film was not releasable. Batgirl will eventually show up in one of DC's stories, he said, and he praised CEO David Zaslav for having the constitution to create the movie and save the studio the embarrassment of releasing it. Here are the full comments, courtesy of Variety. Quote, Batgirl's a character that inevitably we will include in our story. On the Batgirl front, it's not about late in the process of the film getting canceled. I saw the movie, and there are a lot of incredibly talented people in front of and behind the camera on that film. That film was not releasable. I actually think that David Zaslav and his team made a very bold and courageous decision to cancel it because it would have hurt DC. It would have hurt the people involved. This is reality. This is, and Peter Safran has been over some low-budget movies. Like I said, the Conjuring universe is pretty much a low-budget universe. None of those movies were unreleasable. But you have to understand, you can't just release a movie that is branded as a DC movie and then promote it and then have people look at it and say, wait a minute, this doesn't really feel right. This doesn't look right. What is going on with this movie? It damages the entire universe. This is a good way to also understand that they're going to be really careful when it comes to producing DC movies. Now, not everybody likes all the ideas for all the movies. I don't understand why Creature Commandos should be something that is even part of the universe myself. I'm not part of their creative team. I have no idea why they did that. It was already in progress, apparently, and it is part of DCU, but I don't know. I wouldn't have picked that. But these guys do know what they're doing. And when you hear Peter Safran talk, and finally we get to hear Peter Safran say something, because he hadn't been talking very much, like literally at all. He wasn't tweeting. You didn't really get an understanding of like, all right, are these guys serious about the characters? Like, what's Peter Safran going to do? This is what Peter Safran, co-CEO of DC, says about Superman. Superman is the true kickoff for the duo's DCU plan. It's not an origin story, Safran said. It focuses on Superman balancing his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. He is the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. He is kindness in a world that thinks that kindness is old-fashioned. Truth, justice, and the American way. They don't even have that in the comics anymore. If Marvel was in control of the DCU, do you think they'd be referring to Superman as the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way? Or do you think they might say he was related to white supremacy or something like that? These guys are not about making political stuff. And they're not about forcing inclusion for inclusion's sake into content. A lot of people get upset with that. but that's just the truth. Conversely, I happened to come across this article today. Ironheart star Zoe Terakes, Disney series will give little trans kids and trans teens something to look at and know they exist. One of the stars of Disney's upcoming Marvel series, Ironheart, has expressed hope that the show will appeal to transgender children and teens by giving them validation and something to emulate. I mean, this is fine, but the thing is, it's not that fine. Right now, if you're going to be telling stories, what you want to be doing is talking about the characters and the character's journey, not about we cast this person because they look a certain way or because they came from some kind of a specific background, and then as a result, it's going to be good. It's going to be meaningful and socially important. Like, no, a good story is socially important. It doesn't matter who's in the cast. But that's the contrast between what Peter Safran and James Gunn are doing, upholding truth, justice, and the American way as part of the Superman brand. So I hope you're looking forward to that Superman movie, because so far, yeah, that's good. That's absolutely in the right direction. If not, you can embrace everything that Marvel is doing, and perhaps however you look or wherever your background is will be represented in one of their characters, in one of their stories, which of course is really meaningless. Interestingly, also today, Shazam! Fury of the Gods scores China release date, continuing Beijing's reopening to Hollywood. The green light for the Warner Bros. Discovery superhero sequel accelerates China's recent reopening to Hollywood superhero movies. What is going on? Why is China permitting this movie to come back? Why are they okay with Shazam? I really don't know. This article isn't going to tell us, so there's no point in really reading it. The Shazam film, Shazam 1, was successful. It got $43.8 million out of its $366 million worldwide take on a $100 million budget from China. China was $43.8 million. If you know my channel, I always like to say, China only gives you 25 cents on the dollar when you take money in from China. You don't get 40% or anything else different or more like you do in other foreign countries. China is a great market if they can just put it out there and they don't have to change the content to match whatever China's standards are. How Warner Brothers is doing this, I have no idea. I haven't heard any talk about it. I was really surprised to see this article today. Maybe Bob Iger is responsible for Disney getting their movies back in China. Avatar, Ant-Man and the Wasp. They're going to have Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, or as I like to call it, Wakanda World, also is going to be released in China. But how did this come to pass? I don't know. Hopefully we'll see more articles about it and we'll be able to get some insight. And if this all wasn't interesting enough, Swamp Thing might have the director, James Mangold, supposedly is in talks to tackle Swamp Thing, a movie he seems to want to do. He is the same guy that's doing the upcoming Indiana Jones movie. He's had a lot of problem with fans, but is he going to be able to deliver? I don't know. I am going to say this. They're planning a lot of content for the DCU. A lot of content, and they're not planning on necessarily distributing all the content through their own platform. They're already talking about maybe they'll take their Paradise Lost title, which is going to be a TV show, which is like Game of Thrones, but all women apparently, because it's from the Amazon world, which is kind of like my graphic novel, The Mermaids, but that's okay. Game of Thrones with all female characters, and they're talking about how that might be distributed on another streaming platform, which would be great for them because they're getting the DC brand out more and more and more. So the production studio of DC is focused on doing good content, having everything be part of its universe in continuity, and they're at least honoring Superman in describing him in that way, the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. You have to respect that. Doesn't mean you have to go see the movie, doesn't mean you have to like James Gunn or his crazy haircut, but it does mean this is not what Marvel is planning and doing. It's not. And this kind of example with Ironheart, this happens with Marvel constantly. They're constantly focusing on this and not on story and not on brand. And it does get a little bit exhausting after a while. That's why so many of us have given up on Marvel. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Are you surprised that James Gunn came out and said that DC was effed up like this? Are you surprised that Peter Safran is saying, hey, Batgirl was terrible. It was unreleasable. Sorry about that. A lot of interesting stuff coming out of these interviews. Okay, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.